Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Of course, there are a lot of big developments happening on the ground in Ukraine. Also here domestically, Zelensky speaking to Congress, Biden announcing some big moves, some possible openings for diplomacy that we're a little bit hopeful about. So we'll break all of that down for you, of course. We also have the Fed making a expected, but also very significant moves.
Big nonetheless.
Finally, kicking up the interest rates. We will see how the economy responds to all of that and signaling there is a lot more to come there. So we'll break all of that down for you. Trump not doing so well in terms of the primary challengers that he has backed in big, high-profile statewide Senate races. We'll tell you about that. And also, he's pretty much ruled out, if he runs again, having Mike Pence on the ticket.
Right. That's big.
Not a huge surprise, but still very significant. Definitely a big deal there. We've got an update for you on some of the hysteria and anti-Russian mania that is sweeping the world, with a top tennis player potentially being banned from Wimbledon if he doesn't outright denounce Putin. Of course, this is a standard that literally no one else is being held to when they live under oppressive regimes. Also, a wonderful video compilation for you of how the media pushes for war. But this is big, guys. We've been holding on to this for a minute. We had an exclusive interview with Jon Stewart.
It was a big deal.
Not really exclusive because he sat with him. It was exclusive to us.
Yes.
Okay, it was exciting for us.
He sat down with us for half an hour.
For half an hour.
Fulfilled some childhood dreams.
Indeed. Yeah, this is a little bit, I mean, I have to admit, it's a little bit of like a bucket list thing for me, for sure. We get into media, Ukraine coverage. We go back and forth with him on a number of things. So looking forward to sharing that with you guys that we recorded, what is it, like 2 weeks ago now that we recorded this?
That's right.
Anyway, we've got that, but we want to start with what is happening in Ukraine.
There we go. Okay, so President Zelensky has addressed the U.S. Congress yesterday. The most controversial part of it, and what bears the most discussion, is he played a video for the entire Congress where he asks explicitly for a no-fly zone. And after that video, during the no-fly zone, he tried to connect what's happening in Ukraine to our own American history, including 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. Let's take a listen.
Remember Pearl Harbor, terrible morning of December 7, 1941, when your sky was black from the planes attacking you. Just remember it. Remember September the 11th, a terrible day in 2001 when evil tried to turn your cities, independent territories, in battlefields, when innocent people were attacked from air. Yes. Just like no one else expected it. You could not stop it. Our country experiences the same every day, right now, at this moment, every night, for 3 weeks now. Various Ukrainian cities, Odessa and Kharkiv, Chernihiv and Sumy, Zhytomyr and Lviv, Mariupol and Dnipro. Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death for thousands of people.
So obviously an emotive speech there, but look, you know, he's got to do what he needs to do for his country, and we got to do what we need to do for our country. And look, connecting it to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, where the United States was explicitly attacked, is just simply not the same situation as a different country that is getting attacked. And, you know, we can have as much sympathy and feel as terrible for the Ukrainians as possible and try to do as much in order to support them. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we keep our forces out of this war, and not just our forces, but to stop a nuclear holocaust or nuclear Armageddon. You get to choose whichever one you pick. That being said, his speech has been the impetus for a massive bipartisan support of a ton of new weapons to Ukraine provided by the United States. Let's put this up there on the screen. We just greenlit $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine. This includes 800 anti-aircraft systems, including longer range, 9,000 anti-armor systems, 7,000 small arms, including machine guns, shotguns, grenade launchers, 20 million rounds of ammunition, and drones. So this is a colossal amount of weapons that is now headed towards Ukraine, greenlit by the U.S. Congress and announced yesterday by Joe Biden. And it was actually announced and signed at the same time, let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, that Biden signed another $13.6 billion in emergency aid and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. So on the one hand, Krystal, there does not yet have any real bipartisan support for a no-fly zone. That does not mean that there aren't active members of Congress right now. A couple of different U.S. senators, a couple members of the House of Representatives are floating it, basically who want to start World War III. But the secondary of that is that we are now shipping billions of dollars of weapons to this country almost overnight. And that was, supported with a massive bipartisan basis.
Yeah, that's right. Now the skirmishes around whether to provide these fighter jets, I've seen some Democrats, including Ted Lieu, saying, hey, we should really be sending these fighter jets over, supposedly liberal member of Congress. There were a few other things that were significant about this speech. I mean, look, there's no doubt Zelensky and the Ukrainians have already won the hearts and minds of the American people in a really bipartisan fashion. We're going to talk in the block about Trump. One of Trump's candidates has an ad, a negative ad being run against him that he's too sympathetic to Putin. So, I mean,
interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So those are the politics that exist right now. In terms of the information wars, there's no doubt Zelensky has been extraordinarily effective. And also just the cause of the Ukrainians is an incredibly noble one that I think the American people have been really compelled by. So his very evocative language, they also showed a video reel of some of these cities before and what they're facing right now. You can't help but just, your heart breaks for them. There's absolutely no doubt about it. He also did, though, something that was, I think, very intelligent, which is he did once again repeat the request for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, asking them to close the skies. But he acknowledged the politics of this, that it's unlikely to happen, that it is a red line for the U.S. So he said, listen, if you can't do that, at least provide us with these surface-to-air missile systems so that we can shoot down and target Russian bombers on our own.
That's a savvy move.
And it is a savvy move. It's still a really big ask. It's an extraordinary thing for us to ultimately provide. And we don't have all of the details of what is inside of this new aid package, but there are some indications that precisely the systems that he's requesting are going to be provided by the Biden administration. So I think that, that angle was likely very effective. One other thing that I'll say here that I thought was significant is he also sat for an interview with Lester Holt, and he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said effectively, I understand you're worried about starting World War III. What you don't realize is that World War III may already have started. And for the people that we hear, for the people that we hear that are very hawkish in the Congress, in the commentariat, in the foreign policy blob, that's the type of language that they use.
They're using it constantly.
They say, listen, we're already in this conflict. So
no, we're not.
Right, exactly. Maybe that's where we're headed. I certainly hope not. And we ought to be doing absolutely everything we possibly can to forestall that possibility. But again, I thought it was both a shrewd use of rhetoric and also a very dangerous one. Because again, listen, if any of us were in his shoes, we'd be doing the same thing. Yeah, you're trying to save your country. You're trying to save your people. Give us help. I totally get where he's coming from, but we have to understand his interest and our interest and the world's interest are not the same thing. And we also saw Ambassador Michael McFaul, who's turned into a real villain moron in all of this, putting up a tweet that he ultimately deleted that was basically saying, why don't we just trust Zelensky and do whatever he wants us to do? No, his interests are not the same as our interests. We have to recognize that, and we have to be able to evaluate this in a dispassionate way, even as this is the most emotional thing, thinking about these babies and women and pregnant women being killed in maternity hospitals. Of course, it's extraordinarily emotional, but we have to think in a clear-headed and clear-eyed way.
Yeah, this is the point, which is, look, if he's doing what he needs to do. When I say savvy, I mean saying that's a smart way politically. I'm not saying I necessarily support, green-lighting some of the most offensive weapons possible to Ukraine and then having the Russians basically say, well, you supplied them and you're killing our soldiers, and then next thing you know, they go ahead and bomb a U.S. convoy or something like that. I also would not put it out of the realm of possibility that a lot of this aid, as we've already seen in that Russian strike near the Polish border, only 10 miles or so, that a lot of it could get bombed. And that's my question. Who's taking this aid? Is it our pilots? Are we just giving it to them? Are they going to come and pick it up? These sound like minor logistical questions, but if we're going to have a bunch of guys driving into Ukraine with weapons, and we already know that the Russians are bombing said convoys, it doesn't take much.
Legitimate targets.
It doesn't take, and I already said they consider them legitimate targets. It doesn't take much in order for things to climb up the escalation ladder. I want to address that World War III point too. If we were in World War III already, we would know it, okay? It's not happening. There's a reason that they want to gaslight you into thinking that, because then it authorizes all of the most offensive weapons and basically greenlights an entire war with Russia. I was particularly upset over the weekend, over the last day, when the Polish government has been asking for a humanitarian convoy, which would be armed. So an armed humanitarian convoy of aid into Ukraine. And I'm like, is nobody in Washington telling these people to shut up? Because you're a NATO country. Poland, if you go to war with Russia, you're not the one who is going to be launching the nukes. It's going to be us. And given Article 5, we have to defend you. It's a Senate ratified treaty. It's a tripwire. Nobody is telling the Czechs and the Poles, and I forget who the other head of, I think it was Slovenia, the heads of state who traveled to Kiev. Yeah. I'm like, what are you doing? If any of you people die, we're dead too.
Yeah, thank God that all went okay. That was extremely dangerous.
Look, it went fine, but it was an incredibly foolish move for them to do so.
There was also, there was some reporting, because we were talking about that right as it was breaking, so we were just processing kind of like the headline there. There was some reporting after the fact that some of the other NATO members were not happy about that move, and there was a big split and divide over them doing that. I mean, it was brave, but also foolish, and also kind of reeks of just like virtue signaling.
Yeah, save your bravery if we actually get into a war. Don't start the war.
If you're actually accomplishing something good, but they did, there's no sign that there was anything real ultimately accomplished here. Look, in terms of what Putin's endgame is, we still have really no idea exactly what he wants to accomplish. Is it, as we talked about before, they seem to be upping their strikes on these sort of industrial capacity. Are they going to say, hey, we demilitarized them now, we're good to go? Putin is saying we don't actually want to occupy and hold on to Ukraine. Of course, you can't trust a word of anything that these people say. And the concern over it escalating beyond Ukraine is very justified when you consider the rhetoric that he used in that speech before he goes into Ukraine, which was these very, sort of broad empire-style ambitions. However, we also have to say, remember, before this all kicked off, there was a long time of buildup of troops on the border. There were a lot of military indicators that this was going to go beyond Ukraine before it actually happened. So we haven't seen that, troops amassing on any other borders that would indicate that there's an intention to move beyond Ukraine. So all of that is a long way of saying that we are not in World War III, and no one should be thinking that way. We still have to be thinking of taking every possible opportunity we can to provide an off-ramp to make sure that we are pursuing diplomacy, because that is the absolute best possible way for all of this to end.
100%. The president spoke a little bit yesterday about these new weapons. Let's take a listen.
So when the invasion began, they already had in their hands the kinds of weapons they needed to counter Russian advances. And once the war started, we immediately rushed $350 million in additional aid to further address their needs. Hundreds of anti-air systems, thousands of anti-tank weapons, transport helicopters, armed patrol boats, and other high-mobility vehicles, radar systems that help track incoming artillery and unmanned drones, secure communications equipment and tactical gear, satellite imagery and analysis capacity. And it's clearly helped Ukraine inflict dramatic losses on Russian forces.
There you go. In terms of the president triumphantly announcing that, that's obviously going to that's going to bring some pushback from Moscow. Let's go ahead and put this next one up there on the screen, which is funny because at the same time, though, they're shipping $585 million in humanitarian assistance for the Yemenis, which is what is it? I can't even do the math right now. I think 1/20th of the total aid package that's currently going towards Ukraine. We're not saying that the Ukrainians shouldn't get support, but it's always, of course, just interesting which groups of people get assistance, sympathy, and bipartisan support for a total, pushback, and then which don't. And we'll be talking a lot more about the Saudis later on in
very
later
true.
on in this block.
Yemen is the worst humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. I saw some numbers about the media coverage of Yemen versus Ukraine. Now, I think Ukraine is justifiably covered a lot because it represents such an extraordinary pivot point in terms of geopolitics.
Right. It's the West also. You know,
yeah,
you get it.
I mean, there are broad geopolitical considerations here. And, oh, by the way, the prospect of potential nuclear war. However, you know, the complete erasure of the Afghani people, now that, you know, the media's over their panic attack over Biden's withdrawal, and the complete invisibility of what's happening in Yemen, given the extraordinary extent of the humanitarian catastrophe there that, oh, by the way, we're complicit in, it really is a crime and shows you, this is something we get into with Jon Stewart, actually. There's a little bit of a back and forth on all of this. But it shows you that the media always is most interested in displaying the humanity of people whose cause happens to align with what the U.S. government wants and the U.S. government's foreign policy. That's not to take anything away from the Ukrainian cause or their suffering or their humanity. It's just to say we'd like to see that humanity displayed in a more consistent way all around the world.
Absolutely. Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys and we appreciate you so much.